Mohan walked us through what's happening in the digital world and how, if we don't wake up, we will not just get left behind, we will become stragglers. That's a real risk. There's another side, I think, which we've been talking about in India over the last 6 to 8 weeks, more than we have in the previous quarters, about what's going on in the economy. What's happening right now? It's quite clear that going forward, India has positioned itself not just to be amongst the largest economies in the world, but also to be one of the more dynamic ones. On a power purchase parity, we already are at number 3, we're at number 6 otherwise, and we are edging up. But the issue is here and now. So we have an interesting panel here. This is a significant part of what we hear, say, see, and almost think nowadays, because the media drives our ability to assess what's going on around us. And these are some of the most powerful folks in the media sitting on my left and right. I don't think they need introductions, and I guess they're up here somewhere. But between Sunil, Jain, Sanjay, Gupta, Arun, and Venu, we have an interesting set of those who can comment on the economy from different perspectives. Just before we walked in, we had a conversation outside that we will try and keep this conversational so that we can actually understand how each one of them thinks rather than have them make a speech to us. And we will try and come at the economy from different perspectives. There is an issue of cost of money in India. Real interest rates are significantly higher than there are any place in the world. Literally. They've been high for a while, but now the gap is beginning to show up very starkly because the entire world is trending downwards. We do know there is an issue of fiscal headroom because of the fiscal consolidation plan that we built for ourselves. We have something called the FRBM, which allows us or decides how much fiscal deficit we will live with year on year, and how we will bring it down to a level that is acceptable to us in a steady state, which, by the way, is a very smart, sensible thing to do. But at the same time, it puts a burden on additional programs the governments announce. Each time the governments announce a new program, a new plan, it has to be backed up with resources. So where do you get those resources from? Do you raise taxes? Do you widen tax bases? Do you look at other sources, non-tax revenue sources? Do you look at encashing some of the assets the government owns? We spoke about this yesterday. They have land assets sitting unutilized in public sector companies and defense establishments, with the railways. These are large landowners who are not using these lands. Can we look at using these lands productively? Can we look at more and better privatization taking place? Because many countries have said the business of government is not to be in business. The business of government is to create a policy framework which is conducive to the citizens and the economy of the country and the defense of the country, and then take a step back. Allow people to be entrepreneurial. Allow enterprise to take on the role that they are designed for. But is that happening? If it is it happening enough? That's the question I'd like to ask this panel. Are we focused enough on the rural economy? You know, we have 68% odd. No one knows the exact number. I've read different numbers at different times. We used to say 72% at one time. I've even read 65% sometime now. Is still in the rural, living in rural areas. So that's a mass of people which contributes a much smaller part of the economy relative to what some of the other parts are. So how do you create a situation where poverty can be taken away from these parts of India? How do you ensure that the consumption, which was the engine on which Indian economy and growth was firing for the last some years, comes back? It's been sputtering now for a while, and the issue is not only with automotive. We read about the automotive industry over and over again in the media, but that's for a reason, because 49% of the manufacturing industry of India is the automotive industry. It is also one of the industries with the highest multiplier in the world. It is also an industry which got to a level where it was considered kind of world-class, both the auto and the auto component industry. But we have a whole host of other industries which have a big multiplier. How do we ensure that these can get back, not just to being steady, stable industries, but high-growth industries? Because the 5% growth rate that we heard of only recently was a shock for many people. But the reality is the trend was downwards for a while. So why are we not able to read these trends? Sunil, can I start with you to ask you to comment on some of these things? What do you think is actually going on? Is it our inability to read the trends or inability to react quick enough when we see a crisis coming or a situation that is not okay?
Okay, thanks, Sunil. I think, being in the media, you tend to be automatically critical of everything the government does, and you basically feel that you know how it is. Like, I know how you should run Hero, and I know how the economy should be run. Narendra Modi obviously doesn't. So, I think first thing that we got to talk about, which is on your agenda, your number one, is what caused the crisis. I think we need to be very clear about the fact that when you had the boom of 2008-9, and then you had the reckless lending and stuff like that, when this government came in, you had a twin balance sheet crisis. In fact, even before it came in, in UPA, you had that crisis. No country in the world can get out of a twin balance sheet crisis before 10 to 15 years, even the United States. So I think even if we didn't have this government and we had Manmohan Singh and P. Chidambaram, a lot of people's dream team. If you had the dream team, even then you would have had this kind of growth. I think we need to be very, very clear about that. And then we had things like, some were unfortunate, demonetization I think was unfortunate, but RERA and GST, they cause their own, sort of reason for, they cause a problem, and the economy was slowed down was obvious. I think the problem which is with this government, how it compounded it, and this is where the solution lies, for example, as you said, privatization. I think, every time...
And I meant real privatization.
Yeah, absolutely. Not privatization of this sort.
Not one public sector enterprise funding another public sector enterprise.
BPCL or HPCL. Yeah. And the interesting, everywhere in in India, for example, if you privatize, we've seen examples of when Suzuki bought Maruti, suddenly there was a big investment, and then Maruti became a big part of the global export chain for automobiles. If you look at Hindustan Zinc, the moment Anil Agarwal bought it, there's a lot more exploration. If you look at Cain India, it came in and suddenly it's 25% of the total oil production. So I think privatization has to be a very, very critical part of this government strategy. A second part I think is very important is there are a lot of sectoral issues which the government never tackled. Now, I understand most people like to focus on the macro, but I'll give you an example of telecom. It was an industry where, because the high government levies had crippled the industry, and this happened over a period of time. For some reason, maybe Rahul Gandhi's suit boot ki sarkar jibe, Mr. Modi was not able to make any headway there. It's a booming industry. It had a lot of investment potential. It still has, and the government crippled it. If you look at mining, the fact is that we import about $26 billion of coal every year. We haven't been able to open it up. So if there are a lot of sectoral issues which the government needs to fix, which is clearly critical. I think one big factor is, and everyone in this room will understand this implicitly. I don't think industry trusts the government anymore. Mohan has been writing in the Financial Express lots and lots of pieces about tax terrorism. That's something we all know. But I'll give you more examples. For a long time, we've had foreign investment coming into multi-brand retail in a sort of with subterfuge. Whether it was Amazon coming in, Walmart coming in, the government knew it. Jeff Bezos had met the Prime Minister, the Walmart person had met the Prime Minister. Suddenly, after everybody brought in these billions of dollars, you go and change the policy. So I think, people distrust the government. I think that, if we want investment to come back, we need to address that. Last issue, and I'll just leave it, now for everyone, we'll come back later. I think we have a problem in that today, because of this balance sheet crisis, even if the government gets its policy right, Indian industry doesn't have the equity capital to contribute to a new project. I mean, most Indian, the Tatas can do it. I don't know whether the Birlas can do it, for example. So we have a serious problem there, and we need to figure out ways around that. So I'll stop here and,
So one of the things we were discussing yesterday, Venu, was that we've improved on many fronts, even when you look at the ease of doing business. But one area where we continue to lack is enforcement of contracts. Judicial system and the criminal justice system, many say, has probably had the least impact of reforms over the last 30 years. And this is something which many people say holds us back in many ways, that is there enough expertise in the system? Are we willing to make changes? Are we willing to make arbitration a much larger part of the dispute resolution system? Are we willing to look at alternate mechanisms? What do you think is going on there?
Well, in enforcement of contracts, we've been through flip-flops. We've seen last 5 years, India first cancelling bilateral treaties, investment treaties with a lot of countries. Then the replacement did not happen, soon enough. And I was in Germany 2 years ago. German foreign minister was complaining that where is the new treaty, which gives us comfort, for our investments. That aside, the tax tyranny is another very important aspect of business, ease of doing business in this country, which everybody has been speaking about. Mohandas Pai, who's otherwise a big supporter of Prime Minister Modi and this government, has been crying himself hoarse over the last 1 year about the way the tax department has been treating businesses, especially middle level, medium level businesses. The big guys somehow manage the
and startups
and startups. So one of the things, Sunil, since the topic of this discussion is what to do to revive growth, I'll give you 2-3 examples of delayed response by this government which has cost us so much. The startup guys have been crying themselves hoarse for now 4 years, where they've been saying, please don't treat our capital infusion as income. Income tax department has been treating the capital infusion as income if they did not produce the outcomes that they initially promised to in terms of growth, performance, etc. Now, there couldn't have been anything more illogical than this. Finally, it took 4 years, and Nirmala Sitharaman, for the first time in this budget, addressed it by saying that we'll ensure that the tax department will not go anywhere, or tax officers will be kept away from startups. Yeah, okay. No, of course, the tax department is it's an animal which needs to be studied in much greater depth, So Sunil, the other piece which totally delayed response. As Sunil said, the crisis in the financial system was choked even before this government came to power. It was choking progressively. This government took some time to recognize the real, the magnitude of the NPA problems. But I find that the fixing has taken so long, and I still find that recapitalization of banks is far from over. We still need about $1.5 lakh crore to 2 lakh crore of fresh capitalization for banks to actually start lending. I think we are adopting an ostrich-like attitude. We're just sort of burying our heads in the sand. Number 3, GST. For 4 years, exporters, so not 4 years, since 27, GST got implemented, exporters have been crying. And now exporters are a big component of our GDP, industrial production. They've been crying themselves hoarse that please do not delay our refunds, because it's impacting our margins. Our whole business model is going, haywire. I know an agriculture exporter who says that there's no GST in basic agriculture product, but when you package it, when you use other services like loading, there is a GST, and that GST takes 7, 8 months, 1 year to get refunded. So again, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman addressed it last week. So the point I'm making is that all these things have taken 4 years to address. Now we, in a modern, you run a modern economy, policy response cannot be so delayed. I think that's the first thing that we need to fix.
So Sanjay, we've said that India has moved up dramatically in ease of doing business. we're now at 77. I think we've moved up 100 odd places, close to 100 places. But we do measure only in Delhi and Mumbai. What do you think is happening in the rest of India? Is there enough change taking place? Is there enough forward movement in what needs to happen in reform?
Thank you, Sunil. To answer your question first, clearly the ease of doing business is being measured where central government has a say in kind of approving a business, or industrialists approaching authorities which kind of get influenced in some manner by the central governments. Well, it is a fact that businesses being conducted in hinterland or small cities are being more influenced by the state governments. It's the state governments which really need to come up to that level of expectation of the Indian industrialists as well as of the central government to give an ease of doing business kind of a platform. Having said that, on the topic that we are, that there is a slowdown, and all of us over here are trying to kind of question the government in the manner it has handled in the last 6 months. Whereas if you see the government's perspective, they say everything was kind of right just about a year back. And if on the government parameters, if it's a question that I had posed to them, so I'm just sharing it over here, is that if the fiscal deficit is right, the inflation is under control, interest rates are the lowest, what else can the government do? Well, because it opens up a larger discussion on what industrialists want and where is the vision of an industrialist or a sector going to take India forward. So I'll probably rest my case over here and probably take it up again.
Can I come in on this?
All right. Go
Okay,
ahead.
this ease of doing business and all, as we discussed, even earlier. So, like for example, getting an electricity connection. So we moved up dramatically on that. But as we were saying, that I can't think of one businessman who was either demoralized in the past because it took, let's say, 6 months to get an electricity connection, or who is elated right now because it takes 6 minutes. A lot of these things about ease of doing business, frankly, are notional. They don't matter. They make the government feel good. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you talked about the real rate of interest in India being very high. You're absolutely right. Let's say that we lowered the real rate of interest. Or let's say that we made GST refunds faster, the point that Venu talked about, or we made getting the electricity connection faster. Would Kumar Birla still invest $5 billion or $10 billion in telecom? The answer is no, because the telecom policy is all wrong. So I think what's very critical is that the government is sort of got focused on ease of doing business because it's easy for them to actually show results. We need to say, get your policy right.
Yep.
This ease of doing business. See, tax terrorism is an issue. It was there in the past also. Let's get our basic policy right and then move on.
That's an important point. I want to pick up one more with Arun. We do know that there is limitation in fiscal headroom that's available right now. So if you were to pick a list of what are the top priorities of things that should get done, where money should get spent, which could help in a quick turnaround, because at this moment, we are not in a full recession of any sort, by the way. We are clear trend of a slowdown. It's still possible to arrest this. If you were to write a list of things to say, let's do this in this order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you think is relevant, what would those be?
See, in the first place, I don't think fiscal capacity constrains economic activity. Today, live in a world awash with capital looking for deployment. Trillions of dollars in Europe, US, Japan have negative rates of return on the bond investments. Even in other sectors, the return is so low, the pension funds of the aged and the elderly in the developed world are having to increase their corpus to satisfy the minimum pension requirements of their subscribers. How will they do it? Only if they can get a higher rate of return somewhere in the world. They are eager to come and deploy in India if there was some guarantee that the money they put in would actually be put to the use to which it is meant to be put. There is some guarantee of corporate governance that even if profits are generated, it will come back to the investors. And if there is credibility in your accounting practices and standards. Bad politics constrains the economy more than anything else. Take what the new Andhra government did. It has revised or threatened to cancel all the power purchasing agreements with renewable power agencies. It is reneging on all the contracts that are building the new city of Amaravati. Now, Amaravati is crucial not just for Andhra Pradesh, for the entire country. It is a new model of releasing land for urbanization without conflict. The farmers are pulling their land happily because they'll get an annuity and they'll get a certain proportion of their land back as urban land, which is much more valuable. Now, this model is now being skewered because of bad politics. Now, look at the power sector. Today, we are unable to use 54% of the capacity in power sector. Plant load factor is ridiculous. People, decent businessmen who have been successful in their earlier life are now going to jail, are going bankrupt, are being hauled through the coals because they made the mistake of investing in power. Today, we are a country that is deemed to be surplus in power with some of the lowest per capita consumption of power in the world. Why? Because we have a political culture which says it is okay to let people steal power. That you must give the farmer power free forever. And that you must allow an industrialist to draw wire from the farmer's unmetered connection and run his own small-scale industry. Now, unless the political culture changes on this, you cannot make power a viable sector. We have only tried financial engineering in power right from the late 90s AP, DRP kind of program. Even today, the minister is saying you must give a bank guarantee. Financial engineering is not a solution to the problems of the power sector. You need right politics. Now, last point. Today, we see a peculiar divorce of politics from economic performance. Is there any doubt in the heads of anybody in this country, in this hall, that the BJP will win the Maharashtra and Haryana elections hands down? So whatever the level of economic distress or slowdown or problems, that doesn't affect the political fortunes of the government leaders. This itself is a problem for focusing minds on fixing the things that need to be fixed.
So are we saying that performance and economics has no bearing whatsoever on political outcomes of elections? And I want to ask you two questions because you are very close to this. You have an ear to the ground, especially having a big presence in large states like UP, etc. That's first question. Second is on policy itself. Let's go back to the earlier question that was raised. So if you were to talk about some policy changes that are imperative for, I'm not talking of the current turnaround, what would a few of those be?
On your first question, clearly if many of you were here when Amit Shah ji was speaking yesterday, he made a point that the government outreach towards through direct benefit transfer, the money that is being transferred, and the government is going all over the town by saying that huge amount, maybe 2 lakh odd crore rupees they have saved in terms of the corruption or the leakage in the last 5-6 years. So now clearly where is that money going if that was saved? Whether the government has been able to deploy it back in some ways to the people who are kind of taxpayers,
there's no doubt. We are spending more, by the way. The size of our plan every year is expanded. Yeah. The size of our spend every year has expanded.
So politically, the people who make the difference in terms of voting, the government is enabling them by giving them a direct benefit transfer or facilities which they had not even dreamt of before. So clearly, politically, they are on a different pedestal and the economy is on a different pedestal. And as Arun was saying, clearly the this government will clearly win the battle of the polls. And but will it make a difference in the economy? Well, I believe that what your second question was, that a dialogue between a correct set of business people and the government has been clearly missing in this country for long. Initially, it was kind of controlled by Mumbai in so many ways. The Bombay club culture was there. The license Raj was because of that. And once that got demolished some 30 odd years back, it's still there is no clear-cut forum in India which kind of does a proper dialogue with the government on setting up economic policies and has a vision about India, where the society of India is heading to. Clearly, we cannot adopt what other countries did to fix the Indian economy or take India forward. It cannot be a cut and paste model for India. Digital economy that thrived in America, was Mohan was just saying, and Americans use just 5 GB of data, and whereas Indians are using some 15 GB of data. Is that data being used by Indians contributing any way to the economy? It's not. So why are we investing so much into data? Clearly, I was just talking to a minister, the kind of data that you need to do e-governance is far less required than what to see videos all day long. And if people continue to see videos all day long, where is the productivity? And if the productivity of India goes down and we continue to head towards the Jugaad economy, we'll clearly not be addressing the real problem. We need to enable Indians to work, and over there the government needs to have some visionary policy to fix the hinterland and the rural economy, that everybody is given some work over there rather than a migration into the cities, because digital economy will be a big disruptor in trying to give employment to everybody in the cities.
So, MK Venu, let me ask you. Obviously, some things are working. What is it that's working that we can kind of expand? One is to say, this is not working, this needs to be fixed, this needs to be done. But there are some things which are working. Can you mention a few of those?
See, my view is that the Modi government is delivering welfare programs in a very focused way. I take Sanjay's point that they are using technology, they are using all forms of delivery system, whether it is Aadhaar, whatever, what's called JAM, Trinity, to deliver welfare to the poorest households which had not seen such delivery before, whether it's the Ujjwala gas scheme. Now he's talking about drinking water to about 118 million households, whopping cost of, all kinds of numbers are being bandied about, 4 lakh crore, 5 lakh crore. And his Ayushman Bharat, the health scheme,
it's the largest
scheme
ever launched in the world.
Yeah, largest in the world, but so far highly underfunded. So far the budget has provided less than 3,000 crore, whereas most independent analysts have said that it will require at least 50-60,000 crore. Now, he's already committed to welfare schemes, which he started in the previous, during his previous tenure, and which were big pieces of his campaign in the 2019 elections, which he won handsomely. Now, the actual spending in terms of coverage, whether it's Prime Minister's Awas Yojanas, low cost, is to come now. So, my sense is that on welfare programs, hugely committed, as Sunil, you yourself said, spending mein koi kami nahi hai. CAG has put fiscal deficit figure at some 5.8%, not the numbers that the government officially tells us. But kabhi hai wealth creation mein. Very soon, if the gulf between good welfare spending and low wealth creation, if this gap increases, then we are in for serious trouble. Now, in that context, what Mr. Pai has been saying and others have been saying, please leave the wealth creators alone.
So could
that's
this
a simple point.
So could this be that our expectations today are much higher than they used to be? That we want and expect more than we did? If our expectations were what they were 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, that things would actually look fine today?
I mean, I think you're clearly right. Our expectations are now very, very high.
By the way, rightfully, they should be higher.
And they should be. But I just to sort of summarize what we've talked about, I mean, your point that does the economy matter? As TK says that, whether the economy does well or not, the government is, and Sanjay made the same point, whether it's JAM, DBT, Swachh Bharat, Aadhaar, all these things, they're touching poor people, and poor people are going to vote for the government. So I think, the economy matters to the extent that, in the past, the government could fund all of this because the oil bonanza, the oil prices crashed, the government had a huge excise duty, they could fund it all. Now the government has no money to fund from the budget in a direct sense. So I think, therefore, the government will be more focused on the economy. This time the economy will matter. I think, that's one point. I think secondly, what we got to say is that we are getting too despondent. I agree with the point that Sanjay is making that if everybody is watching just an old version of Pakiza or whatever new movie there is today on their geo phones, then, does it really help the economy? I think that's one part of it. The other part is, where Mohan comes from. In Bangalore, they've got a health stack, they've got the UPI. UPI is one of the best payment systems in the world here. If you look at what's happening with
It's the lowest cost transfer of
there-
money the
there
world
is
has
a
ever
lot,
seen.
There is a lot of technological leap that India is doing. So I don't think we should be that despondent either, So there is stuff like that happening. I think, another point is that we are obviously unhappy with the fact that you've got a 5%, 5.5% growth rate. But as we've talked about, some of these are sectoral issues. If the government wants, it doesn't mean it will happen, but if the government wants, these are not that difficult to address. And to take your issue of there is no money, I think that is completely not true, because it's a conventional way of looking at things. So if you look at the budget numbers, Nirmala Sitharaman gets X amount from taxes, she's got to spend 0.95X on committed stuff, so she's got no money for other things. But this is what privatization, this is what asset recycling is. You've got BHEL. BHEL has got 1,000 acres of land. You tell somebody, I'll give you these 1,000 acres of land, I want you to build a 10-lane road from here to Bombay. So there is a lot of money out there that is just locked in, money that belongs to the government. We've created a Hyderabad metro with no money at all from the government. The government just gave land rights. You created a world-class Delhi airport with no money from the government. You give them 250 acres of land, along. So we've got a lot of money locked in. So if the government wants to do it, they can do it. So I think we need to be very careful. Don't be despondent. A lot of this current crisis we have is because people are in a cycle of gloom.
So
There is a problem, the government can fix it if it wants to. There's no guarantee that it will, but I'm just saying it's easy to do. Maybe Mohan should come into the PMO and things will get done.
So yeah, and I want to add something to it. So I want you to actually respond to this as well. And two, the mood seems to be more despondent than the numbers would justify. That's a comment now which is starting to be made over and over again. Would you agree with that?
I think I would. And the reason is the seeming indifference of the government to what is happening in the economy. Today's Times of India carries a story that states have been asked to ban production of single-use plastic. Of? Single-use plastic. At a time when the economy is struggling to breathe, you want to choke it a little bit further. For what? This obsession with appearing good, where you're leading the world and meeting climate change obligations, etc., is creating problems for the economy, and that doesn't seem to matter to the government. And that is part of the reason why the gloom is so bad. Just to sort of supplement what Sunil said, and the point that I made initially, it's not really the government's own money that is required to be crystallized. The government needs to facilitate money coming into sectors and allowing economic activity to happen. You look at all the real estate projects that are stuck. Now, the latest booster dose from the finance minister was a 20,000 crore for real estate, for projects that are 60% complete and are not NPAs. Why do you need a government package for that? They will get funding in the normal course. Money is needed, special provisions are needed for real estate projects that have become NPAs, which are stuck. And there are tens of lakhs of crore worth of real estate projects that are stuck around the country. Why can't you get a vehicle either directly sponsored by the National Infrastructure Investment Fund or something else? Get money from around the world. Release these projects from distress. Complete them. Check out the promoters required.
Absolutely, TK, you're absolutely right. This 20,000 crore was a good idea, but it was completely underfunded.
Yes.
And the restrictions were too much. But that's what I said, if the government wants, if they were to say that we'll put together an 80,000 crore fund, we'll get some well-known builders, Tatas, whatever, and they'll complete projects, we'll give them to people.
They don't need government funds.
You can fix this in no time if you want to.
Yeah, so the constraint is not government funds. Government just need to facilitate. It's the government will that is lacking. And the absence of will is what is creating this.
So a point that was just made that government is going to ban single-use plastic. Now, it's a question to the industry that for 15 odd years it's being written that plastic is killing the environment and something should be done about it. But what was the industry doing? Was it waiting for the government to come up with this directive? So if that is the case, it's the same case with a BS2 or BS4 or a BS6 engine, that we all knew that these are polluting engines and the polluting fuels, but we are not doing anything about it. We are just waiting that the government will maintain a status quo, and we want to rise out of the status quo. If the world is changing, we need to change. And it is a ban of a single-use plastic, whereas recycling of plastic is a completely unorganized sector. Nobody is kind of putting in the money or capital to see and invest how to collect plastic and recycle it back. So if recycling is an industry which belongs to the unorganized sector, and whereas the organized sector which continues to produce plastic is not wanting to invest back, is it government's duty to recycle plastic? Now that's a question that will come to the industry someday or the other.
I think this
if you see regulated economies, it is the industry which is again made to pay back for the damage they do to the environment. It's not the government that will come and fix the environment.
So that's a good point, Sanjay. And I made this yesterday at a session with Sanjeev Sanyal. He and I were both at a session together with Shireen Bhan. I said, it is imperative right now, especially in a crisis, that industry, government, civil society start working together, each one taking a role and a responsibility, and bring back some of this feeling of partnership and trust that used to be there. That is lacking. And that actually hurts everybody. Absolutely. Because the government doesn't want to do things against the country. They don't want to do things against the people, nor does the industry. So I think there is a need for us to repair some of this and figure out a way, how do you create a win-win where everybody feels part of the same problem and, by the way, an equal part of the solution.
Sunil, just to add to your point, Sunil was earlier saying that industries doesn't trust the government in terms of policy stability. It also, Sunil, works the other way around. Government also doesn't...
Absolutely. I mean, not say that all industrialists are angels. They're not.
My point is, Sunil, something that should be a given in any modern economy, any government which makes policy for a modern economy. If the finance minister has to keep restating that the tax fellows will not trouble you, I'll ensure that he doesn't. I mean,
it's shocking that it needs to be said.
It's shocking that this has to be
said, exactly.
restated year after year.